Hey everybody, today is Monday, July 15th, 2019. My name is Matt Fury, and you are about to listen to The Rough Cut. All right, time for another edition of the Rough Cut podcast. Thank you very much for coming to find us. Thank you for joining us today. Maybe you caught the last episode with editor Dan Leventhal. Dan was talking about his new film, Spider-Man Far From Home. That movie is currently killing it at the box office, so if you haven't heard that interview with Dan yet, check it out. It's really fun, really informative, and you could actually win something from listening to the episode with Dan. In case you missed it, here's a little trivia question that Dan threw your way.
When you go to see Spider-Man Far From Home, you'll first see Jake Gyllenhaal in the opening. I want somebody to tell me when the next time his face appears in the film.
So there you go. You got to go see Spider-Man Far From Home. See if you can spot Jake Gyllenhaal for the second time. I'll give you a hint. It's not easy. It's hard to find him, but it'll be fun. If you find him, tweet me at Matt Fury, MattFeury, and the first person to come correct with the right answer, we'll find a little prize for you. I don't know what. I'll think of something, but it'll be cool. So hit me back with that answer as soon as you can. I'm going to leave the contest open for maybe another week if we don't get the right answer sooner. Okay, so today's podcast, one of my favorite people in the business, editor Eddie Hamilton, a really fun guy, really bright guy, and a really great editor. He did that film Kick-Ass with Matthew Vaughn. They were going to do X-Men First Class together. And then Eddie just followed up with other big movies, Kick-Ass 2, Kingsman: The Secret Service, again with Matthew Vaughn, Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, Kingsman: The Golden Circle, and then Mission Impossible: Fallout, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I can tell you right now, Eddie's hard at work on the sequel to Top Gun Maverick, which is expected out in 2020. So good luck with that, Eddie. Can't wait to see it. Now then, Mission Impossible Fallout came out about a year ago, almost to the day as we're recording this. So that begs the question, if you recorded this interview with Eddie a year ago, why are you releasing it a year later? Well, here was the situation. We were doing a presentation in Berlin, Germany with Eddie the day before the premiere of his film, Mission Impossible Fallout. And we ended up releasing the presentation he gave online. Unfortunately, he couldn't show too much because the film wasn't out yet, so he sort of danced around a lot of aspects of the film, but still gave a really great presentation. Since we released that video, I kind of pocketed this podcast interview and never released it. So fast forward to a few months ago in Burbank, we had Eddie back again doing a special open house presentation with Avid, and this time he had permission from Paramount to show all kinds of great stuff from the film and really dug into his timelines, all these techniques he uses, how he organizes his projects, and people loved it. And ever since we did that, I've been inundated with, when are you going to release the video from Eddie's presentation in Burbank? Well, I don't have permission for that yet. We're still waiting on a number of levers to be thrown. The director needs to look at it. Tom Cruise actually needs to approve it. So we're still waiting on getting that video out there. But when we do, I promise I will let you know. But in the meantime, I thought we'd go back and release this never-before-heard interview with Eddie. Really informative, really insightful, and his enthusiasm for his job, his craft, and for sharing what he knows with other people just really comes through from the beginning to end of this interview. So, without further ado, the editor of Mission Impossible Fallout, Mr. Eddie Hamilton. All right, Eddie, I have to say this is probably the first time I've ever done a podcast down by a river in the shadow of the former Berlin Wall. So thank you for this unique opportunity that you're providing to me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Matt. Thanks for inviting me.
It seems like a week ago you were finishing up Mission Impossible Fallout. How is it possible that you can finish a film so late in the process?
When you're finishing a film this complex, there's a lot of parallel processing of the post-production workflow. So there are people working on the visual effects, there are people working on the sound, there are people working on the music, and there are people working on the final color. And everyone is doing their best to try and get as much done as possible so that when the final little details are dropped in, they can be dropped in, color corrected, and then we can go with the film. And so what we've been waiting for is this 3-minute shot, very complex shot, which comes about 20 minutes into the film. And we have different iterations of the shot from Double Negative, the visual effects vendor. And we've been mixing sound to those earlier versions. And the music's already been written for that scene based on the earlier version. They've already done a rough color pass. So we finished pretty much the entire movie, apart from that little 3-minute section. And we got the final VFX shot in. So as I'm talking to you, 8 days ago, we got the final VFX shot in. Chris McQuarrie and I saw it at about 10:30 at night. We finished the VFX, everyone's thrilled. There's a whole team of people who've been working on that single 3-minute shot for months. We think it's great. We're very happy. The shot gets, the files get sent to Molinaire, our colour correction facility, and Asa Schul, our enormously talented colorist, does a colour pass on it. So, a week ago, Chris and I go into the DI facility, we colour correct the shot, we make our final few tweaks, and then the process begins of taking that information and inserting it into the final digital master files on all the different versions that we have. And then everyone around the world who is waiting to create foreign language versions and subtitled versions, they can all jump on it as well. And then a week later we have the premiere. And in fact, they did a screening on Monday night in Paris for journalists. It was the kind of world press preview screening, which had French subtitles on all the way through. So they did race to get all the French subtitles on. But again, they had done most of it. They were just waiting for that last little piece to drop in. And the premiere is in IMAX, so they rushed to do the IMAX version of that shot as well and make sure that went into the IMAX version. And the film looks spectacular in IMAX. All the VFX for the IMAX sections were done at 4K. The IMAX aspect ratio is wider, so most of the film is 2:3:9 and the IMAX aspect ratio is 1.9. So the aspect ratio dynamically changes and gets bigger. So you get this very exciting, larger, more immersive image for certain sections of the movie, which is cool.
So it's funny to start off an interview talking about the end of a movie. We really should start talking about how it began and when it began. How long were you on the project for?
Well, I started in early April of 2017, so it's now July 2018, so about 15 months in total. And initially, the film production were in Paris, and during that time I was still finishing Kingsman: The Golden Circle. So I was actually working on Mission Impossible in the evenings and at the weekends, assembling the sequences they'd filmed in Paris, and then they went to New Zealand. And there was a 2-week break between finishing filming in Paris and starting filming in New Zealand. And I flew out to New Zealand, and I was able to use those 2 weeks to catch up on everything that I hadn't quite finished from the Paris portion of the filming. And then in New Zealand, I was able to take the digital files. They filmed partly on 35mm. All of Paris was 35mm. In New Zealand, all of the action on the ground was shot anamorphic 35mm film, but anything involving Tom Cruise and helicopters was filmed on the Panavision DXL camera, which is a digital camera which shoots at 8K. And they would transcode those files, and I would be able to work on them immediately the day after they filmed them. Meanwhile, all the negative was flown back to a lab in London, and so there was a bit of a delay, but I had the video tap files, and I would work with those until the film files were scanned and transcoded and sent back to me in New Zealand.
So were you always on set regardless of where you guys were shooting?
Well, I wasn't in Paris, and I wasn't on set in New Zealand. I was near set, and I was in a house that had been rented by the production. I did go to set one day, which is when they filmed the very final scene, which I thought would be quite a fun sequence to witness, going before the camera.
Are you ever asked to be on set just to make sure? I mean, I've heard of editors being brought into set to make sure that shots were, the coverage was right, or the right footage is taken care of. Has that ever happened with you?
It does happen. On Mission Impossible, there were various insert shots where I was present to advise on the composition of the shot, because all inserts are filmed to tell a very specific story, and if you don't get it exactly right, then the exact story's not told, and therefore you have to go and do it again the next day. So that's quite common, actually, for editors to be on set for those very specific little moments. When they were filming in Abu Dhabi, we were on an airbase. They were using one of the UAE's Air Force planes, a C-17, to film the skydiving sequence, and I was actually in a trailer on the airbase working with Chris McQuarrie, the director, and he would be, monitoring the rehearsals, the skydive rehearsals during the day, and then he would actually go and watch them film in the evening, because they could only film, for a very limited period of time in the evening at magic hour, just as the sun was setting. and I did travel with Chris quite a bit. Like, I worked at his house quite a lot. I worked in a hotel in New York for a week where he was, and I would be at Leavesden Studios where they were filming, a short walk from the set. So I would quite often go to the set and watch them filming and feed back on what had been filmed the day before, you know.
It's kind of hard to talk about Mission Impossible without talking about Tom Cruise, who, aside from being the star, is also a producer on the film. How involved does he get? Involved with editorial does he get, and what kind of notes do you get from Tom Cruise?
Well, he produces the film, as you say, and Mission Impossible in 1996 was the first film he produced. So he's been very actively involved in the inception of these films, of every film in the franchise. You know, choosing the directors and the collaborators that he works with. And he's intimately involved in the whole process, you know, from script development to casting to locations to costume design, art direction, cinematography, all the way through to editing. And he leaves myself and Chris alone initially to put together an assembly, you know, and a director's cut of the scene. And when the film, he will watch sequences stand alone and give us notes, but really he starts getting very involved when there is an entire assembly of the movie which he can watch and react to. But he does rely heavily on audience feedback. He comes to all our test screenings, and we look over the cards and we look over the scores that the film gets, and we listen carefully to the focus groups. You know, we're very focused on making sure that we reduce audience confusion and address areas where there are pace problems with the film to make sure that the pace of the film works fantastically well from beginning to end. You know, it's confusion and pace that we're constantly chipping away at to try and improve, so there is no confusion, ideally, and no pace issues. And I think for this film we did achieve that, you know, over the weeks that we were refining the film and testing it and racing to get to our, you know, July delivery date.
So you talk about big action films that you've done, Kick-Ass 2,
yes,
the Kingsman movies, and
yes,
now these two Mission Impossibles. I guess it would be easy to say an action movie, it's just a series of a bunch of really dramatic stunts stitched together with some kind of plot device excuse just to put them together.
Yeah.
But what kind of discussions do you really have during development, during editorial, where, as you said, you want to reduce confusion? You don't want it to be just that, just a series of really big visuals.
Well, you've got a terrific Academy Award-winning screenwriter in Chris McQuarrie, who is constantly revising the script almost on a daily basis to improve the storytelling, to improve the conflict, to improve the characterization, to improve the dynamics between the characters. Because you go to watch these movies because you love watching the team work together, and you love seeing Ving Rhames, you love seeing Simon Pegg, you know, you love seeing how they work together as a team along with Tom. You love seeing, you know, now we've got Rebecca Ferguson playing Ilsa Faust, how she comes into it and how they're going to relate as a team overall. Then you've got, you know, the various antagonists, and you've got Henry Cavill and Angela Bassett again, and Sean Harris is back playing Solomon Lane. So interestingly, Mission Impossible films are broken down. Really, there is a series of 3 types of sequence in Mission Impossible. You have the setup, or the exposition, where they explain the set piece that's about to happen, and the stakes of the set piece and the rules of the set piece. Like, Benji, in order for Benji to achieve this, Ethan has to do this, and these are the things that can go wrong. And then what that allows you to do is allow the suspense of the set piece to play out without any exposition. The audience knows the rules, they know what's going to happen, and so you can play out the sequence with minimal music often, and the audience kind of holding their breath, watching everything, seeing if what they hope or what's supposed to happen does actually happen. Usually something goes wrong, some unforeseen detail trips them up, and you know, in Rogue Nation, for example, Ethan's underwater and he gets knocked by one of those big moving arms, and he drops the 2 discs that control the information that he needs to allow Benji to walk through the gate analysis corridor. And so he doesn't know which one is which, and he's battling underwater, and it all takes a lot longer than he thinks. But you know that he's got to get the correct one into the slot before Benji gets through there, otherwise Benji's going to be caught, and you don't want Benji to be caught. So you watch it, and it gets very exciting. But then after you've been through the exposition and the setup, then you have the suspense that usually ends in and a burst of high-octane action as the heroes have to escape or something goes wrong or they have to figure out a different way of completing the mission. So you have these chunks of 3 action where the audience's pulse rate kind of gets higher and higher. Set up, everyone's watching the characters talk about what they're going to do. Then you've got the suspense where you see them doing it and it usually goes wrong. Then you have action. So you can kind of draw a graph for each of these movies with kind of 3 levels of excitement. And actually, one of the things I did on this film was I got one of my team to break down all the movies minute by minute and draw a graph so we could see how the different films compared and where the action beats occurred, you know, in terms of how far through the movie. So we could, when we were building our film, the new one, Mission Impossible Fallout, we could compare the minutes and how much action occurred. And it was kind of more of a fun exercise because each film has to stand on its own, so you can't compare it to the other movies. But it was interesting to see that kind of information compared and see the durations of each movie and, you know, how the amount of action kind of tallied up over time. You know, it was good fun to do that.
Couldn't you do something very similar with your timelines, where you see just the pace of cuts or the shortness of cuts compared,
Sure.
you know, in the suspense into action versus the exposition setup stuff?
Very much. Yeah. If you zoom into the timelines, you can see clearly where there's kind of longer shots, where there's dialogue playing out. Obviously, in Fallout, you'll have a big long section where there's a big action sequence done in one shot. You know, the skydive sequence that I'm talking about, and then if you have a gun battle or if you have a car chase or something or a fist fight, there's a terrific fight sequence that happens in a nightclub bathroom, which is tremendously kinetic and visually stylish. You know, it's played in quite wide master shots, so you can see that Tom Cruise and Henry Cavill are really having to go toe-to-toe, and a lot of people talk about that, but you can certainly see that there's a few quick cuts there to give that sequence the right kind of kinetic pulse that it needs to keep audiences on the edge of their seat, you know.
So we've talked a little bit about your experience on the films and your techniques. How about the tools? What was the basic setup? You mentioned most of it was shot film, but
Yes.
From there, what was the post setup?
So I was very keen to try an ultra-high definition workflow on Mission Impossible Fallout. So I discussed it with Paramount and they loved to try it. And so we ended up working in 2160p, which is 4 times the resolution of normal 1080p. And all our 35mm negative was scanned at 18 frames per second on a Scanity film scanner. So it doesn't take that much longer to scan all the dailies from the day before, turn into DPX files, they're color corrected, then the burn-ins are applied, all the burn-ins that I need about, you know, the key numbers and the shoot day and the lens and the slate and the take and all that stuff is burnt in. And then what we did on this film is they would render out very quick HD DNX36 media, which we would download first thing in the morning, before the files were color corrected. So they would throw on a generic LUT through all the dailies. We would get them. The team would start, and they would sync up the sound with those DNX36 files. Then we would get those bins and we would start, you know, grouping clips and putting in extra metadata, and they would prepare scene bins for me. And I would be able to start working with the dailies at 1080p, DNX36. And then, you know, one of the most important things is scanning through the dailies very quickly and advising the production if there are any problems in terms of coverage that is not quite right, or extra shots they need to tell the story, or if there's focus problems, you know, you can tell them that they may need to go back and pick up a line or two. And then at lunchtime we would get a hard drive with 2160p media using a codec called DNxHR LB, which is a 144 megabit codec, which meant that it would take a while for the media to download if they sent it to us over Aspera, but they could get a drive to us in 10 or 15 minutes from Pinewood. So we would get the drive, copy it onto our Nexus, and archive the DNX36 media and relink all the master clips to the 2160p DNxHR LB media, and it would all relink effortlessly, and we would click refresh sequence, and, you know, all the media would pop up to 2160p. Because it's made from digital files, all the in and out points and the master clips are all identical, so everything relinked perfectly, and that would become our new master files. And we worked in 2160p for the whole timeline. Overall, we generated about 40 terabytes of media, so maybe 300 hours of footage, which ends up in the kind of 2.5 hour, well, it's 2 hours and 22 minutes, I think, the end running time of the movie. So that's what we did on this film, and it was completely painless and rock solid in the way that Avid, always tends to be if you take care, when you create the files and set up the project correctly. It worked perfectly.
And you had all that, basically you had the entire movie online. You never had to worry about moving stuff off. Like you said, 40 terabytes.
So we had a 48 terabyte Nexus with about 40 terabytes, on various partitions. So there was a bit of space. And then, of course, when all the VFX start coming in, they're all coming in at 2160p. And then all the 3D shots, they did a really fantastic 3D post-convert. But they've had a team of 600 people working on that since January. They've done a beautiful job of the post-convert in 3D, and a lot of the shots, a lot of the sequences do lend themselves to 3D. Some of the helicopter sequences has extraordinary depth, and you can really feel it. They've used the very finest 3D artists to do this post-convert. But that would then, the media, we would kind of go to 41 terabytes, 42, so we're gradually filling up our 48 terabyte Nexus. But I have 2 archives of the Nexus running on local hard drives at all times. So we've got 3 20 terabyte G-RAIDs over here, which will eventually be sent to the studio for the studio archives of everything. And then I have a standalone RAID, which is loaded up with everything. And those backups are topped up twice a day. That means that at any point I can take a drive and take it off site and plug it into my laptop and carry on working at the director's house or on set or at my home if I need to, over the weekend, for example, sometimes.
So you would just have your laptop and...
I just have my laptop and plug it in, and the 40 terabytes would just pop up on the desktop, and, it would all just work seamlessly.
This is relatively seamless, just going from your local copy and your laptop. And I think you even had mentioned you were working in the car on the way to work.
That's true. So I would have an hour-long commute to get to Leavesden Film Studios during the filming period, and I would sit in the back of a car with my laptop on my lap, and I would work off a fast SD card, 512 gig SD card, which my team would top up with that day's footage with the MXF files and the sound, so the picture and the sound, so I'd be able to drive home and continue to work on dailies, and then the following morning come in. And so I would leave home at 6:20 in the morning, and by 7:20 I'd already done an hour's work on my laptop. It's phenomenal. It takes a while to copy the files on there, but it has a read speed of 95 megabytes a second, so you can play multiple streams of ultra high definition files. So if you've got 4 cameras,
and these are in the DNX HRLB code, so that's why you're able to get that.
Yeah, so you get that all on there, and even if you've got 4 cameras running on a dialogue scene, you can open up the group clip, go to multicam mode, watch the 4 cameras, and start making your edits that way, and it works completely flawlessly, And my MacBook isn't even a modern one. It's a Retina MacBook Pro. It's only got 8 gig of RAM, but it works completely fine,
So the laptop's a little out of date. How about the editing software? Which version of Media Composer?
Well, I use the latest version because what's great, Avid really it appears to me that they've started investing heavily in regular updates on Avid Media Composer. So every 2 months or so, there are tweaks to the software that come out with features that have been requested by Avid customers, by the Avid Customer Association. And they listen to the people who use the software, and they prioritize what people are asking for, and they task the software developers to implement these updates to the software, and there's some great stuff coming out. Even the smallest little tweaks I find very useful. So that's why it's worth, I find, upgrading to the latest version. I like being able to use the latest software and have all the new features. Even stuff like recently they allowed you to kind of change the scrubbing speed. Tiny little thing, but it's actually really useful to not just go double, triple, quadruple. It's like you can have intervals of that, and you can. They had it so that when you scrub, the sound stays at the same pitch. So if you're scrubbing through dailies, you can actually watch dailies at like 150% speed and still understand what's being said, rather than the voices all go up higher in pitch and then higher in pitch and then higher in pitch. The pitch stays consistent, which is something which you may not think would be useful, but when you get used to it, it's invaluable really, because you can actually scrub through dailies a little bit quicker.
Well, that seems to be a recurring theme when I talk to editors, is the little things over the course of 18 months on a film, a year on a film, all those little things add up to some real differences.
Yeah, well, it's time saving, because when you're working on a film like this, you are having to deliver a lot of work in a very short period of time. So even saving a keyboard press or a mouse click over the course of 15 months adds up to a lot of time saved. And I have a director sitting in the room and I need to make magic happen in seconds. And the trim tools have evolved. I mean, the trimming in Avid is astonishingly powerful. The way that it can predict, what tracks you want to select is brilliant, and the way that it will cleverly figure out where it needs to add edits and to keep everything in sync. It becomes second nature, but it's stuff which you used to have to do a little more manually and now is completely automated and very reliably automated, so it doesn't get it wrong. It gets it right every time. I love the fact that they introduced a way of muting clips on the timeline. So if I have several different pieces of music stacked up, I can mute the ones that I don't want and leave the one unmuted that I do want to hear. But if the director goes, hey, what was the other piece of music we used to have on there? I just right-click, unmute, and I can play it for him straight away. And all the levels and the automation, everything is still preserved there. And then you can right-click and mute it again. The 5.1 audio mixing capability, the fact that Media Composer will down-convert the 5.1 timeline to stereo in real time, completely reliably every time, means that if I'm working on my laptop on a portable system with just 2 speakers, all the 5.1 automation is still there, but it will down convert it to stereo. And then when I take my timeline back to my 5.1 setup, it's all still, the 5.1 is still there, and stuff like that, which is insanely powerful and quite hard to do well, just works. And so it's why I choose to use Media Composer on these complex projects, because it is extraordinarily powerful, very customizable, so I can get it to how I want to work. And, you can create magic for the director in seconds. And I love that,
So speaking along the lines of the way you like to work and timelines, something you said last night that I found really interesting is you like to keep everything in the timeline.
Yes.
Explain a little bit about what you mean when you say I like to keep everything in the timeline.
Well, there are a lot of people who collaborate with you. I have a team of assistants. I have 2 first assistants, 2 second assistants, a trainee, a VFX editor, a VFX assistant editor, music editor. Music editors using Pro Tools, but still accessing all our files. And then we have 3D editor. So there is a lot of stuff going on in the timeline. We're tracking VFX, we're tracking VFX plates, we're tracking VFX versions. Every version of every VFX shot is nested on its own track, so that at any point you can step into that nest and see like 20 different variations of a single shot. We have 2 3D parts of the timeline. So initially they send 3D iterations where they've got the depth right, but they haven't quite got the roto right. And then there's another layer where the final 3D shot comes in. But at no point do I ever want there to be multiple copies of the timeline. And when I change it, other people have to manually update the timeline to match the changes. I only want there to be one master timeline for each reel of the movie. And this movie is split into 8 reels. That's a legacy term from when you used to work in 2,000-foot film reels. We call them reels now. It's just a convenient way of splitting the film down into 20-minute chunks, so that if I'm not working on that part of the movie, my assistants can work on it, or the 3D department can work on it, or the VFX team can work on it. And I have these really cool little intercoms that sit on the desk, which I just bought for this film. They're like intercoms that you buy for an office, where you can just point and talk to everyone in the room, everyone on the corridor. So I can go, hey guys, I finished with reel 3, you can export that now. Can VFX, can you shut reel 4? And everyone can hear it, and then they can reply and go, yep, okay, we'll take reel 3. VFX, we've shut reel 4, you can have it now, Eddie. So that's how we collaborate, and we make sure that there is a single master timeline for that 20-minute chunk of the movie. So at no point is anyone having to play chase. They are working on the live master timeline. And everyone has been doing it for years, so they understand the importance of not messing with the timeline. Sometimes they'll open it locked if they're just referring to it rather than making changes. But a lot of the time they're working in the live timeline, and they're putting in new VFX shots, or they're putting in new music that's come in from the composer, or new sound from the sound designer. and my team are all incredibly experienced, and all of us have made many mistakes before, which we never make again. I mean, we're all human, so mistakes do happen, but my team are world class, and so I trust them implicitly to work on the master cutting copy of each reel.
So I really like that you brought up the legacy term, or the legacy of 2,000-foot reels and 11-minute reels, and having to organize based on old film conventions.
Yes.
Are there things that today's editors, kids just coming out of college, are lacking because they didn't have to go through that,
I
film
don't think
experience?
So. I think what's important is storytelling and characters, and learning how to use the tools to tell stories. And if you want to graduate and work on these big movies, you will have to climb the ladder of the industry. And in the course of climbing the ladder from a complete beginner through to an advanced editor, I've been using Media Composer for nearly 25 years, and the workflow that I have has evolved over that time to what I feel works best for me and my team. And other people may do it slightly differently, but there are industry standards which have evolved over many years, because it allows you to split the film up into chunks. So my team can be working on the rest of the film while I'm working on this part of the film. And when you have a lot of people collaborating, it does make sense to not have a single timeline with the entire movie on it, because if you make a mistake, you're only making a mistake in a small section of the movie. You're not affecting the rest of the movie and things like that. Avid is amazing because it archives every save you make to a folder called the Attic. And I ask the Media Composer to keep 5,000 copies of the bins in there, 50 copies of each bin, but 5,000 files in total. So you've always got this incredible back history of all the bins in case you make a mistake. And sometimes mistakes do happen, and so you can go back to one that was made 5 minutes before and retrieve it, and the mistake's not there anymore. So if you want to succeed in the industry, you will learn about best practice. And I also encourage my assistants to tell me if they have thought of a better way of doing something. You evolve your workflows and your best practice week by week as new features are released in the software, and as new cameras come out and new ways of recording sound. And so you're constantly evolving how you ingest the media, how you transcode the media, how you manage the media, and then how you evolve your timeline. My timeline is very complex now. I have 6 mono tracks of dialogue, then a 5:1 dialogue track, then I have 4 mono sound effects, then I have 6 pairs of stereo sound effects, and then a 5.1 effects track, a 5.1 background track, then 3 pairs of stereo music, and then a 5.1 music track. So it's a lot of tracks of sound. And then we have about 22 tracks of video where we're tracking different parts of the process, different VFX and subtitles and VFX titles, and so it gets quite complicated. And we have 2 different aspect ratios. So we have a 2:40 aspect ratio for the main part of the film, and then the 1.9 IMAX aspect ratio. So we're keeping track of all this stuff on the timeline. And that just evolves over time. And, that timeline was different on Kingsman: The Golden Circle. It's evolved on Mission Impossible Fallout, and it will likely evolve further on the next film that I do. But that's just a side effect of more experience and working with a great team who suggest great ways to improve the workflow and stuff. It's exciting times,
So looking at your resume, or your CV as they would call it, you're pretty firmly entrenched in the action film genre.
Sure.
What is it you love so much about doing that? And do you have a desire to switch things up and try something, a medium that's a little different moving forward?
Well, interestingly, a film like Mission Impossible has all kinds of scenes in it. There are very emotional scenes, there are comedic scenes, there are suspenseful scenes, there's action scenes. So you use all the editing tricks. On a film like Mission Impossible, there's very advanced storytelling. All kinds of emotions are being played out. So you're using a wide variety of techniques to tell those stories. I mean, suspense is very hard, comedy is very hard to get right, action is very hard to get right in terms of not overloading the audience with action. Audience can get action fatigue quite quickly, and so you have to find the exact right balance of the action and the emotion and the suspense. It takes a long time on these movies to get that right, and we're acutely aware of how the audience is feeling about the film second by second through the movie, you know, and then minute by minute, and a lot of care and attention goes into that, and holding the audience's hand in the correct way through the film so they can engage properly with the story. So I feel like I'm being able to work in a variety of genres when I do a film like this, you know. What excites me about working on these films is that after 25 years of climbing the ladder of the industry, it is an enormous privilege and very exciting to be able to collaborate with other people who have worked for a very long time to become masters of that part of the craft of filmmaking. It is a huge privilege and an honor and enormously rewarding to collaborate with them on a daily basis. You know, Mission Impossible filmed for 160 days, so you're collaborating with these incredibly talented people for a long time, and you have the resources to do justice to the ambition of a film like this. You know, when we're filming the skydive sequence and Tom Cruise is doing 105 jumps to create a 3-minute scene in the film, it's exciting to be part of that process, you know, and I dreamed of doing that from a young age. You know, I started loving movies around the age of 8 and read as many books as I could and watched a lot of behind-the-scenes documentaries and listened to film soundtracks and watched movies, and then around about the age of 17 discovered that editing was, for me, where the combination of storytelling and technology really suited my temperament and my personality, and I didn't mind sitting for hours on my own in a dark room working on, you know, the tiny details of the story plus the broad canvas of the overall structure of the film. And I dreamed of working on films which had the resources to realize grand ambitions. And when you're working on a film like Mission Impossible, it is one of the greatest modern practical stunt franchises that's around today. You've got James Bond, obviously, but you've got Tom Cruise, who's been making these films and playing that character, Ethan Hunt, for, you know, over 20 years now. And what you can dream up, you can film for real. And you don't get that opportunity very often in life, and it's something which I treasure, you know, every day working on these films. A whole generation of people have grown up watching these movies in the theatre, and they want the movie to be great. And we, as the filmmakers and the collaborators, want to honour that and want the film to be great. And we really work incredibly hard, myself and Chris McQuarrie and Tom Cruise work incredibly hard to deliver that experience for the audience, and we're hungry for them to have it, you know?
Well, I got to say, I mean, your enthusiasm for this, not just this film, but the business that you chose really comes through. It always does. It's why we always like to bring you out and do these presentations.
It's a great honor, Matt. Thank you very much.
Well, there you have it. I don't think I was overselling it when I mentioned Eddie's enthusiasm and his love for his craft. He truly is an example of, if you love your work, you're never going to work a day in your life. So thank you very much, Eddie, for all the time you've given us, both back in Berlin as well as in Burbank earlier this year. Like I said, as soon as we get the clearance to release the video of the presentation Eddie gave in Burbank, I promise I'll let everybody know, so sit tight, and it'll be coming soon. One of the really cool things about that presentation is Eddie actually opened up his entire Mission Impossible Fallout project in the new version of Media Composer. And if you haven't seen the new version of Media Composer, it's really cool. So just jump on the avid.com, create an account, and download the trial. Try it out for yourself, see how you like it. Thanks again for listening to The Rough Cut. I promise we'll be back again soon with another great episode. In the meantime, if you have any feedback, any comments, any requests, go to theroughcutpod.com. There's a contact page there with a little forum. You can tell me what you think about the show, any requests for any special guests that you want to hear from. Just let me know. This is Matt Fury, and I will see you next time once again on The Rough Cut.